I'll tell you why the Jaguars could have a surprise pick and go through who might be some of the candidates to get picked in the first round. And then we got new kickoff rules. Who this? We'll tell you about it today on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Thank you for joining me, Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast, where it's your team every day. And we always thank you for making us your first listen. Quick reminder, we are free to subscribe to on our YouTube page that is called Locked On Jaguars. Make sure you go over there, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and then hit that bell so you receive notifications each and every time we drop an episode. Also, wherever you listen to your audio podcast, make sure you check in at that location every single day to make sure that you do not sleep or get slept on when it comes to a new episode. Today's show is sponsored by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Shout out to the everydayers for joining me here every single day, and you could be an everyday if you just join every single day. What is up? What's going on? Got some news, got some stuff floating around we'll get into. Let me go back to front. Starting in segment 3, we're going to talk about new kickoff rule. Who this? All right, I'll tell you who it affects. Does it affect the construction of the rosters? I think it might. And the way, I think it's already had an impact because this didn't just come out of nowhere. And I noticed an uptick in free agency for running backs. Are they going to have to add more value by actually returning kicks? Because now it'll be a lot of people in a confined space, and there's nobody better at that than running back. So we'll discuss that possibility. Who would surprise or disappoint you if the Jaguars chose them in the first round? We know it's not easy to disappoint Jaguar fans because they're used to it, but we'll discuss that. And why in the first segment here, I'll talk about pick 17, why it could be a shocker. All right, so let's get into it. Pardon me for clearing my throat. Like DJ Cool say, let me clear my throat and let's just get right into it. Pick 17. I have been on record. I've been one of the biggest critics of Trent Baalke that you could imagine, right? But the one thing I have said that Trent Baalke has done well is that first round pick. Now, it's pretty much a no-brainer when they picked Trevor Lawrence. No one knew that they were going to take Travis Etienne, but because we thought there was a lot of urban influence with that also, as it was. Now, when you look beyond that, Trayvon Walker came next. Wasn't a big surprise to me. It was a surprise to a lot of people. It was not a surprise to me, and it's something I don't think the Jaguars regret one bit, and they shouldn't. Last year, it was Anton Harrison, tackle out of Oklahoma, ended up being, I think, one of the best young left tackles in the National Football League, and maybe his future is at right or left tackle. It does not matter, especially these days. It really doesn't. So the thought is that outside of Trevor Lawrence and outside a little bit of, so the thing is you have to ask yourself, like, okay, he's done a good job, but did we expect those picks? I can tell you right now, I don't remember one person expecting them to pick Anton Harrison. He was a fringe, maybe a late first round, early second. I tell you, the way people talk about him and the way they talked about Jordan Morgan this year, that to me, that's what I remember. Or Kingsley Salmatea, I think that's how you say his name. That's how Anton Harrison was thought of and considered in last year's draft. So, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but normally you can get a guy like that. It's kind of the same way Tyler Guyton, his former running mate at Oklahoma, is looked at, even though they're not really similar in the way that they play in terms of who they are and what their bodies are. It's pretty much the same thing. And that's why I think last year when the Jaguars were picking 24th and then they eventually traded down to 27, where they got Harrison, that's why when I talked about how teams can get really good football players, like real good teams that always pick late, whether it be Buffalo or Kansas City, how they always seem to have a real good football player just kind of fall to them, right? Well, the Jaguars were actually in that situation last year. So the charge now is for them to get a really good player when they're picking earlier and when it's obvious. But there's something different about going up and staying there. And we're going to talk about this as if they're going to stay there at number 17. What's going to happen is it's not going to be who falls to you. They're going to be probably 12, 13 players right there that the Jacksonville Jaguars will absolutely love. Maybe even more than that, right? But I'm talking about 12 in that range of that spot. Because remember what they talked about last year was when they got to 24, that there were 3 or 4 guys that they were real happy with. And they didn't want to go back too far. They wanted to get some more picks and maybe end up with the guy that they wanted. It turns out, I think they did get the guy that they wanted in Anton Harrison. If you put all the things together from the past, they got the guy that they wanted. I remember Phil Rousher on the video coming in and being all happy that they got him, right? And maybe there was somebody else, maybe another position coach would have come in. Maybe if they had gotten Dalton Kincaid or something, another coach would have come in and go, yeah, that's that. But eventually, somebody that they wanted was there. Now, you can ask yourself, was it worth the mental gymnastics of moving back? Because we talked about that yesterday. Like, what did they really get with all of those picks? Because later on, they were trying to get rid of picks to come back up. And maybe that was the strategy last year, is the one that I talked about this year a little bit about a week ago when I said maybe the strategy is to come back in the first, but then come up from the bottom. So you come back this way, you condense everything to like pick 32 and then start honing in at around pick 150. Get as many picks as you can in there. Maybe that was their thought, but then people didn't allow them to do it last year. So I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But the thing is through all of that, this is different because you're going to have a serious pick of the litter right here if you want. And I hate to call these guys litter, but you know what I mean. It's just a figure of speech. You're going to have a chance to really, really get somebody. And if you're going best player available, it might be somebody that you don't think or that fans don't think is going to come in here and start. So what are the positions on a football team? First of all, what are the positions on a football team where there's a scenario where you could take best player available, but that person, because of all of the additions that you made in free agency and the guys you have on the roster now that might be free next year, is this a situation where the Jaguars are going to look at this like they had success last year, take the best player available regardless of position, with the exception of quarterback, of course, because that's always different. Running back is too. But are you going to take best player available regardless of position, bring him in to compete? I'm going to go through some positions, right, where there's a chance that there's one or two things that happen. Bring him in, he's going to compete, and he's going to have a chance to play because you move people around and you share snaps. That would be, in my opinion, interior defensive line, defensive back. That's where you get that. And wide receiver to a certain extent, right? But could you possibly bring him in where you already have somebody in position, let him play a year, have him just in case of injury, let him play a little, but mainly you're getting him ready for next year when you're going to let somebody else go? Is that the best play? That would more likely happen on offensive line or defensive back. More than likely, that's where that goes down at offensive line or defensive back. So I'm going to look at those 4 positions: interior defensive line, offensive line, regardless of interior, outside, defensive back, and wide receiver. We're going to take a look at those positions. And then we're going to talk about players who may be available at 17 and who would surprise. Who do you think might go? But what if it's a surprise choice because it's the person that the Jaguars really, really want? I'm going to get into all of that, and I'm going to do it here in just a second in the second segment on Locked On Jaguars. Now, before I tell you guys about today's sponsor, and that is the Gametime app. That's right, Gametime, man. Listen, I have had some frustrating moments trying to buy tickets, especially at the last minute. Like back in the day, like when I was living check to check, I used to get paid sometimes on payday was on the day of the event, right? And sometimes when you do that, you wait till the last minute and you can't get tickets. Well, if you download the Gametime app, you won't have their problem, because whether it's procrastination or just money issues, you being late is not an inconvenience to them. As a matter of fact, you fall right into their wheelhouse, because this is what they do. They find you tickets to any event, whether it's comedy, theater, baseball, basketball, concerts, or football. It does not matter. And they have zone deals where you can pick the section, and Gametime picks the seats for big time savings. Now, here's the thing. They can do it at the last minute. They can even do it after the event has already began. All you got to do is download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On, LOCKEDON, all one word, for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, segment 2 here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Talking about pick 17. We're not going to talk about moving out because you have to have a dance partner. And what if somebody doesn't want to move and wants to keep all of their picks? So you got to make your pick at 17, which isn't a bad thing, right? You may believe the guy you want, there's a value for you to move back, but you can't just move back and force people out of the way. It's not like you just jump in the lunch line in middle school and go, this is my spot. No, that's not the way this works. You have to have a dance partner. If you don't have a dance partner, and I have found out what teams will not do because you don't want to set this precedence. What if somebody doesn't want to give up a second round pick for you to move back? What if they go, we'll give you a fourth because we don't really want to do it? Do you do it? No, you don't do it just with a fourth because you can't set a precedence that you're cheapening the value of draft picks just so you can move back and get something extra. And then you just might miss out on somebody. And people will never let you forget it if you miss out on a dude that ends up in Canton somewhere. They're going to hold that over you. Like, people are still talking about the fact the Jaguars traded a pick that ended up being Rob Gronkowski. Yeah, they did. They traded a pick one year, a third round pick. I think it was the Jason Kraft pick, if I'm not mistaken. They gave it up to the Chargers to move up from the third round to the second round. I think they gave up a second round pick to get another third round pick, took Jason Kraft. The second round pick they ended up giving up, ended up in the hands of New England, and it ended up being Rob Gronkowski. So those are the type of things that folks don't allow you to forget. And you don't want to be moving back just to be moving back. So what if they get stuck? What if they get stuck at 17? And we're going to focus on these positions: interior offensive line, interior defensive line, offensive line, and wide receiver and defensive back. So the conventional wisdom says that whoever they want is going to be there. But I'm going to tell you, I did, and I can't give you all the information though, but I did a mock draft, a very, very competent mock draft with people who knew and people that absolutely know, right, what their teams are thinking. And I was included in that. And I'm going to tell you something. I ended up in a spot that I did not want to be in, but I could not move. So therefore, I had to take the player with the higher value, and it might not be the player that had the positional value that was as high as some other people or what the team actually needed. So here's my guess. Let's look at corner, since everybody's focused on corner. Right now, the Jaguars corner room, now that we know that Darnell Savage is going to be a nickel, and he's going to be their regular nickel, with Antonio Johnson possibly being a big nickel. That means when they take out a linebacker in their base, I think the Jaguars base probably is going to be a 4-2-5 anyway. But if they happen to be in a 4-3 base and they move a linebacker out, they usually put a corner in a nickel. Sometimes they put in a safety, just to have more run support. But in this situation, from what it looks like, based on what Doug Peterson said, the back end is Andre Sisco and Antonio Johnson, second-year player Antonio Johnson. And Darnell Savage was brought in here to play the nickel, right? And they're playing press man and press bail technique, and he's probably going to play a little off in the slot, so he probably fits that. Even though you didn't see him do a whole bunch of it in Green Bay, they're doing something here. They're going with their scouting here, because normally you don't pay a guy to come in here and do something you didn't see him do before. But they're going with their advanced scouting. This is the pro personnel department saying, no, maybe there's a connection somewhere that I don't know about. I have no idea, no clue. Maybe it's just the beat that somebody had on the kid when he came out, and he wasn't asked to do that before. But in any event, they're starting three corners with Ronald Darby and Tyson Campbell is pretty much done, right? Both those guys, I believe, will be free agents again after this year, unless they go ahead and re-sign Tyson Campbell. But even then, you need four. The Jaguars got guys that they like. They like Greg Jr., and they like Chris Braswell. They like those guys to be developmental players after pick 4. So maybe that's not it. But if it was, everyone's talking about Quinyon Mitchell. Everyone's talking about Terry and Arnold. and they should be. I think they'll both be gone before 17. I think Nate Wiggins has a chance to be gone because of his speed and his length. But I also believe that Nate Wiggins could be on the board at 17, and the Jaguars say no because they may believe that he's not a willing tackler. Okay. And if he's not a willing tackler, do they go for another player at that position? Well, here you go. The next couple of corners I think that fit on their board are Kool-Aid McKinstry, TJ Tampa, and Ennis Rakestraw. Could they like one of those guys more than everybody else in the draft? You're absolutely right, they could, because they're the Jacksonville Jaguars. They could say, we're going to get our guy. Nobody's going to let us bail out of here. Nobody's going to let us leave. Nobody's going to trade up with us. So you know what? A surprise pick might be one of those players. What about wide receiver? In the wide receivers in the drafts that I've done, a lot of those guys have gone too. But then you get down there and you got to say, okay, what's the difference between A.D. Mitchell? I think Keon Coleman might be out of it a little bit. Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Leggett, those guys. The one guy that could be a surprise is Xavier Leggett. If they just like him more than they like anybody else, regardless of all these other boards that people have, remember, these draft boards aren't going to look like anything you've ever seen. Nobody gets it this close. Nobody. I think the one that started out where it was pretty much stat quo was the Trayvon Walker draft. Everybody kind of knew who those guys, where those picks were going to go, right? I think it started getting weird at like 6 or 7. But these things don't go. The true draft boards of these teams are going to show up when you least expect it. And I heard Rick Spielman brag about Ennis Rakestraw and talk about how much, how he can really play. Really play. So when you get to that, and then you get to some of the other spots and some of the other positions, that might be something that they do. What about interior defensive line? I keep hearing Byron Murphy. I don't think Byron Murphy fits what they do here. You could get me wrong. You could call me wrong all you want to. I just don't think that's what he's going to do. That's what it is, right? But I do think Johnny Newton, and there's not that much difference in size, right? But I think Johnny Newton, because he's not as much of an anchor guy as he is a dude who's going to penetrate. Johnny Newton has a good shot of being somebody that the Jaguars love him, and they want to go overboard on interior play. They could look at Johnny Newton and say, there's Grady Jarrett right there. And you know what? Guys that can win one-on-one, guys that are like that, Ryan Nielsen definitely has some experience with him. He had Sheldon Rankins, and he's another dude who at that time was built that way, but Sheldon Rankins obviously a bigger player now. But around that time, Sheldon Rankins was hanging around the 300-pound mark. Another guy is Michael Hall out of Ohio State. Same thing. Could you fall in love with him at that spot and realize you really want him on your team and nobody will let you move back, but you won't be able to get him later on in the draft? Sure, they could do that. Last but not least, offensive line. What could it be? Could they be glancing into the future, and could they say, you know what, we're going to lose Cam after this year and Walker Little, he ain't going to be ready. So you know what, let's go ahead and get our left tackle or get another tackle and think that they're going to move Anton Harrison over to left tackle. Do they go back to Oklahoma? Do they get Tyler Guyton? Do they get Taluisi Fuaga, who's going to be there? Do they say, you know what, let's go large. Let's get big. Let's go Amarius Mims. Remember, the Jaguars had a mantra, and that was we need to get more physical. And I know there's a lot of talk about the wide receivers and their blocking. I don't think the team wants to get more physical, but I think that's something they need to do better. But I don't think that's what they're talking about when they say, hey, man, let's get more physical. And all of a sudden, you're going to start hearing everybody talk about how good the wide receivers are blocking. No, I think when they want to get physical, they were talking about Mitch Morse. They were talking about having healthier guys on their interior. And they were talking about guys on the defensive line like Eric Armstead that could move people. But why stop there? Why stop with just one player? Because when that guy sprains an ankle, you're right back to where you were. Right? So all of these things, those are some names, some surprise names, some things that might come up and you go, what in the hell are they doing? Don't say that I didn't warn you. Now, we ain't trying to hedge our bets here, but what we are doing is we're just reminding everybody that the draft can be super, super unpredictable, especially when a team likes a player and they want to move a little bit. Remember, the key is to get the guy that you want the most on your team. at that spot. If you're allowed to move and get picks like they did last year, fine. But sometimes teams aren't going to allow you to do the thing that you want to do. So you have to be prepared and have a list of names that won't surprise you. I'm going to let you know something else you have to be prepared for. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel programmed for your everyday to bring you the best stories without all screaming and yelling. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news. Streaming 24/7 on YouTube for the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, last segment here. Coming up on Locked On Jaguars. New kickoff rules. Who this? All right, I'm going to tell you who it is and who it benefits and whether or not it affects roster structure. I'll give you my opinion on that in just a second here on Locked On Jaguars. I got to let you know about FanDuel, man. I'm telling you, you better get on FanDuel. You got a couple of days before they start going through the Sweet 16 and getting these games going, and your brackets are already busted up, but now you can still win some money because FanDuel lets you bet on every single individual game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. I'm going to give it to you again. It's FanDuel.com/lockedon, all one word, LOCKEDON, and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. All right, third, final segment here on Locked On Jaguars, where it is your team every day, and we thank you for making us your first listen. Look, this is what we went through. Pick 17 could be a shocker. Who would surprise or disappoint if they were picked at pick 17? I don't think anything I said earlier would be too big of a disappointment. I think Ennis Rakestraw would probably make people upset until he turn, or TJ Tampa, until they turn out to be a real good player. But there are going to be people in the draft that are going to be drafted way higher than you think and way lower. Look, free agency was, started, a few weeks back, and there was something that shocked, I think, a whole bunch of people. It sent shockwaves to a bunch of folks, right? Those are two things. The lengths that teams were going to sign backup quarterbacks is one thing, right? Well, that's because now they can keep three, and teams are going to keep three quarterbacks instead of two. These are results of conversations that coaches have had with management, and management has had with competition committee, and they have these conversations. And then by the time we find out that there's a trend going, then we have to figure out why the trend is what it is. And we realize that, okay, there was something that was going on way before all of this stuff started happening. So the same thing happened with the running back position in free agency. Guys started getting paid. Like last year, they were begging people to pay them, right? This year, they got paid. Running backs, like teams you didn't even think needed running backs, were going out getting running backs. Like Washington got a running back, and the Titans signed a running back after they had some success with a young guy last year. So it's like Chicago got a running back, and then Philly goes out and they get another running back, and we're sitting there like, what's with all these running backs? What is this whole thing? What's going on here? Well, the new kickoff rule came into effect. Now teams are going to kick the ball off. It is going to be amazing, man, because the kickoff team ain't backed by the kicker anymore. They're way up, and they're lined up 5 yards across from the receiving guys, right? So there are 10 guys facing off like it's Game of Thrones or something. You got the kicker way back on one end, and then you got the guy who's catching the ball standing back like at his goal line. It's the rules from the other league. I think the USFL, whoever has that rule, or the XFL, whatever league that is that's doing this, the league got it. So the goal is to don't create these situations where these guys are running, and crashing each other from a distance. But it is to add more excitement, more fun, and make the kickoffs more valuable. It's a part of the game that's been there since the game has started, and they didn't want to get rid of it. And I agree with it, right? But now it's going to ensure that a lot more of these kicks are returned. But the difference is, without this being this wide open space with everybody running and charging, You can't move until the dude touches the ball because you're already there, right? So you got 20 guys in this little confined space, 5 yards apart. As soon as this guy touches the ball, now y'all can start blocking. Here's what I think is going to happen. Think about the guys on the team like Tyreek Hill in critical moments that you want to have the football in their hands. But they can't, I don't think they can be these little wiry, skinny guys. Like somebody was talking about Xavier Worthy going higher because of this. I don't think that's the type of guy. Tyreek is compact and powerfully built, right? I can see, though, where you, in a critical point with 2.5 minutes to go, where you want your best guy to touch the ball, that you put your best football player back there, as long as he ain't the type of guy who's built to get hurt, right? But it has to be somebody that's used to running in traffic. I could see Saquon Barkley doing it in a pinch. I could see most teams second down back, as long as he's not the bigger variation. I could see him doing it. I could see a lot of these fifth wide receivers. I could see Malachi Corley as a rookie. You're saying, okay, this is going to be a part of your repertoire. But why did I mention the running backs? Who's better on your team than running in confined spaces? Confined spaces where it's crowded. Running backs. Who's trying to get to that next level? Running backs. Good luck to your kicker trying to stop Saquon Barkley on a kick return, right? The other thing is, when they started overpaying these backs, not really overpaying, but going against the grain and paying. It's overpayment if you take it relative to the past. When they started doing that, I was like, hey, man, it's something up. These owners don't just start doing stuff that they normally wouldn't do without having a reason to. So they came up with this rule. I don't think this is the reason they came up with it, but one of the byproducts of this rule was, okay, if you want more money, we got to add more value to your position. We got to also change the way we construct our roster. Maybe we keep 4 of y'all in there now. But remember, there's nobody blocking for this dude. He's back there by himself now. Everybody who's blocking is up front. You can't have a dude playing off when everybody is assigned a man. 10 guys assigned a man. You can't have somebody letting a free run get to this dude, right? So I think it changes your roster. I think it makes more value on special teams. Now you won't have the traditional type of special teams players you're going to have. Now you got to have guys that know they got to win one-on-one real quick, and they got to be able to get through that guy. This is almost like the Oklahoma drill or something in practice. Now, you got to get beyond the guy and make the tackle. Remember that drill where you had a running back and a blocker and then just one defender? Remember that? A running back, blocker, and one defender. A running back, a blocker, and then 2 defenders. Like a down lineman and a linebacker, and you had to figure out which way you're going to go to make the play. This is going to really, really add a little bit more to the game. I think it's going to help prevent some of the injuries, but I think it adds a lot of excitement. It also, I believe, makes guys that are better once they have the ball in their hands, that run after the catch, is going to make them more and more valuable. Those are running backs. Those are those dudes, man. As long as they can catch it when it's in the sky, I think it's going to be all about the backup running backs. The guy, I think, in my opinion, the Jaguars got a perfect guy, and that's Devin Duvernay, because Duvernay, he's built like a running back, right? But he also plays wide receiver, but he has lined up in the backfield before. I think big, durable guys are going to be the difference in whether or not teams have a lot of success getting that ball out to the 35, 40-yard line, and occasionally even breaking one if the guys have enough speed. So I do think that there's a correlation between this and the fact that they started paying those running backs. Good rule. This is one thing that I agree with that the NFL has done. So I will give my stamp of approval to it. I think it's going to add a little bit more flavor to the game, and people won't be just going out here when it's time to kick off and using that as a bathroom break. You don't need a break from me, because all you got to do is go to Locked On, because Locked On has launched the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, man, you got some fire podcasts out of me today, and we're going to keep doing that anything that comes out of the owners meeting, anything we hear in the draft, obviously, we'll give you updates from it. But until then, man, you guys take care, man, and take care of each other. And we'll see you as we continue to head towards the NFL draft. And Locked On Jaguars will have you covered the entire time. Take care.